In today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by Pistons Talk, and we will be discussing positional battles for the Detroit Pistons this upcoming season. Preseason just a few short weeks away, so stay tuned for all of that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button at the YouTube channel or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today, you'll hear a little bit more about them a little bit later. But on today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by Anthony, or you guys may know him as Pistons Talk. This is your first time ever on Locked On. I don't know how we haven't had you on the podcast before. So I appreciate you coming on. You guys can obviously find him on Twitter at Pistons_Talk. You also find his YouTube channel, Pistons Talk, on YouTube. Anthony, how you doing today, man?
I'm great. I'm finally happy I got the invite, man.
Yeah, I don't know how this hasn't happened before, but better late than never, right? So, all right, so I want to talk about positional battles. And before we go any further, I do want to tell everybody I am feeling a little bit under the weather, so I think my voice sounds a little scratchy. I apologize for that, but it is what it is. I'm sure we'll have a fun episode anyways. But preseason is just a few short weeks away, and the offseason, I feel like, has been incredibly slow. Thank God we're finally here, and we'll talk about preseason a little bit later. But what I really want to stick on to start off is positional battles, because the Pistons have a lot more depth this year at positions that matter, and like depth that actually could play. Whereas not just a Joe Harris who, not like I said for months, wasn't going to really play, wasn't expected to play for real. They actually acquired players that could play at multiple positions. So I want to ask you to start off, are there any positional battles that you're really looking forward to watching, and what are they?
So I think we could probably agree, like point guard, power forward, and center. I think they're pretty locked down. The two positions I have the most questions about is who's going to start at shooting guard. Is it going to be Jaden Ivey? Is it going to be Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr.? And small forward too. Like, is it a lock to be Simone Fontecchio, or do you put a Sar out there because you want some sort of defense out there? I think those are the two positions where I look at, and I just don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the good things about this team. At least one of the good things compared to the last few years is that we don't know what combination they're going to go with, but not for a bad reason. It's because they actually have multiple options in which they can go with. Whereas like in previous years, maybe it was because, you don't have good players at one position, or do you want to play a rookie right away, or do you want to play a vet? Like this is a discussion because they have multiple options, and a Malik Beasley and a Tim Hardaway Jr. and a Simone Fontecchio and a Tobias Harris, who is penciled in at the 4 basically, but a Sar Thompson, a Jaden Ivey. Like they have multiple options to go. And the position that I'm really looking forward to seeing what they go with is that 2-guard position, because I think that one right there has the most possible options, because I could see them going with Jaden Ivey. I could see them going with Malik Beasley. I could even see them going with Asar Thompson at the 2 spot and then starting Simone Fontecchio at the 3. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that 2 spot. And I think one of the things that are kind of revealing their hand a little bit is the fact they haven't gotten a backup point guard yet. So that makes me believe they're probably pushing towards Ivy being the backup point guard and potentially starting Malik Beasley at the 2. That's what I think there is probably the most likely scenario. But what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's a good assumption because they didn't really go out and target a backup point guard. I mean, like I thought Markelle Fultz was right there if you wanted him, and he still hasn't been signed by any NBA team. I don't know what's going on there, but would not surprise me if you do see a veteran like Malik Beasley, who I think we can all agree is a perfect fit next to Cade, being a high volume, just 3-point shooter and a sharpshooter out there. The questions I have with Ivy and Cade is like, there's such a question mark with fit And I think it's kind of unfair to have those criticisms towards both of them because they haven't really played a whole lot together. Obviously, last year wasn't really Jaden Ivey's fault. It's kind of a coaching issue, which I could understand at the beginning of the season. You obviously wanted the defender out there with Killian Hayes, but I think your assumption of having Jaden Ivey possibly as a backup point guard, and they haven't really got a backup point guard. I think that's the right direction that the team should look to go to.
If they do decide, let's say they do go with, and we haven't really touched on the 3 position, because I agree with you that point guard's locked up, power forward's locked up. I can't imagine center position isn't locked up. I can't imagine a world where Duren doesn't start. Even though I guess you can't say it's 100%. I'd put it like 98%, but I can't see it not happening. If they were to, because there's a lot of people that still want to see them start Jaden Ivey next to Cade Cunningham, despite the fact that they don't really have a backup point guard yet. They'd rather just, just start them both and then stagger them to fill up all the backup point guard minutes. I don't know how feasible that is, but there's a lot of people that believe that. If they were to start Cade and Ivey, what would you go with at the 3rd position?
At small forward?
Yeah. At the 3 position, not the 3rd position.
You know what? Just for like the offensive sake, I'd probably either start Tim Hardaway Jr. or Simone Fontecchio. Probably I would lean more towards Simone just because I think he can do a little bit more creative offensively. And I think defensively, he wasn't no disrespect to Bojan, but he wasn't a traffic cone. Like, can at least move his feet and stay in front of someone. So I'd probably go Simone at small forward.
So we haven't brought up, at least I don't think neither of us have brought up, well, I did briefly, but Ausar Thompson. I think Ausar could start at either the 2 position or the 3 position. Where do you think Ausar lands in these positional battles? Do you see a world where he's starting to start the year?
I do. I think he's a guy that it's going to be really hard to keep him out of the starting 5. And he seems like a player that JB Bickerstaff is just going to fall in love with. Like, if he played an Isaac Okoro role, I could definitely see that for him. And to your point, yeah, he could play the 2 because then you could kind of hide Simone in situations where, Ausar can just switch. And I think we're both in agreement that he's probably the best perimeter defender on the roster. I think he can guard 1 through 5 personally. That's just how versatile I think he is as a defender. But I think it'd be really, really hard to keep him out of the starting lineup. But if you just want to go all offense and you're just focusing on scoring the ball, you probably go Simone. You want more of just a defensive starting 5. You're probably going to put Ausar either at the 2 or the 3. I think he could play the 2 as well.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this many times in the podcast, but in order for him to be able to play the 2, his handle would have had to improve. I'd hope that's the case, because I think that should have been, me personally, I've brought it up many times, I think that should have been more prioritized than his off-ball shooting, because I think it unlocks more for him as a secondary playmaker and all that. Excuse me. But I think Ausar, I agree with you. I think Ausar is going to force his way into the starting 5, because I do think that he's the only player out of Malik Beasley, out of Simone Fontecchio, Jaden Ivey, Tim Hardaway Jr. that is legitimately incredibly impactful on at least one end of the floor. Where I think Ausar, look at all the Pistons' best defensive lineups this past year. They all have him in the lineup. They played Ausar, Duren, Cade, Ivey, Simone. That survived because Ausar was out there. You take Ausar off the floor, it doesn't survive. Like, all the lineups just with Ausar out there, that's their best defensive lineups, because he was just that good as a rookie. He was a rookie.
Yeah.
So the fact he was that good as a rookie, I can only imagine what he's going to be his 2nd year. And like you mentioned, JB Bickerstaff's a defensive coach. So the fact that you have a guy at the wing position that's that athletic, top percentile athlete, top percentile defensive player, I just struggle to see a world where where JB Bickerstaff doesn't start Ausar Thompson. So let's operate in that world real quick, and I'll ask you this. If JB does go with starting Ausar Thompson, how do you make the lamp around him? Because obviously there are spacing concerns. I may think that he has to improve his ball handling, but to act like there's no spacing concerns would be foolish. There are some. So if you were to start Ausar, what do you think the lamp has to look like around him?
I think you immediately have to start Malik Beasley at the 2. Not to say that I don't believe Jaden Ivey can't start next to Cade at the 2. I just think having another veteran presence out there with a Tobias Harris and a Jalen Duren, I think having a floor spacer like him could make it work. And if you are going to start Asar at small forward, you're going to have to use him as a role man, I think, in some situations. You're going to have to be really creative. And I know he's really active in terms of backdoor cuts. The one thing I don't think JB Bickerstaff will do is just have him stand in the corner like he was last year with Monty. I think he understands, like, he's not known to be a good three-point shooter yet. Obviously, we hope Fred Vincent could work his magic and he turns into a respectable shooter. But I think there are creative ways where, you can use him to where his shooting isn't so much of just like a shackle where, in previous years, and I'm probably dating myself going way back, like when Stanley Johnson was on the Pistons, they just had him in the corner and just play defense. Like, I think you can't do that with Azar. I think it would be a waste of his talents because what you just mentioned a couple minutes ago, he's just so active and he does so many different things to impact the game and impact winning.
Yeah, and I think if you start Asar Thompson, you immediately have to start either Malik Beasley or Simone Fontecchio because you need the shooting. You can't risk it with Jaden Ivey as a shooter right now. You just can't risk that. If you're going to start Asar and with Duren and Tobias, you need that extra spacer next to Cade. So whether you want to start Asar at the 2 and play Simone Fontecchio, or if you want to play Asar at the 3 and put Malik Beasley at the 2, you need that extra spacer if you're going to go with him in the starting lineup, I think. I don't think there's any doubt about that. My one concern is you brought it up, and then we'll move on. They can't just play him in the corner, and that's why I have hope for him as the 2, because that would push him into a lot more secondary playmaking, have the ball in his hands running weak side pick and rolls and trying to use his vision and playmaking. Now, again, as I've mentioned many times before, you can't really do that if he hasn't improved his handle from where it was last year. So if he hasn't improved his handle, I'm interested to see how someone who hasn't been necessarily known as a creative offensive coach and JB Bickerstaff, how he goes about using him in this year's offense. So, but when we come back, the preseason is a few weeks away. I believe October 6th is their first preseason game. A few weeks away. What are some storylines that we're looking forward to this preseason for the Detroit Pistons? NFL fans, we got something special for you, man. With FanDuel, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you play your first $5 bet. I've told you guys this many of times. Going back a few years ago when betting became legal in Michigan, I didn't know anything about it, didn't know where to go, didn't know what to try. I tried out FanDuel, and I have not turned back since. I still use FanDuel to this day. It's incredibly fun, easy to use, and most importantly, self-explanatory. Like, a lot of these places can be pretty confusing on what to do. FanDuel is easy to use, fun to use, and self-explanatory. All the things I need in the best sportsbook out there. That's FanDuel. You can find it over on FanDuel.com. Again, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet with FanDuel. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review or whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Anthony. So a few weeks from now, the Pistons start their preseason. The offseason is about to be at its end. Thank God. It's been incredibly slow, incredibly long. I know you've been feeling the same pain over there. This has been a rough one, but we're finally at the finish line. And there's a lot of things that to be looking forward to in preseason. So what are some main storylines or some main things you want to see out of the Pistons in the preseason?
I kind of want to see communication. I want to see if they're actually going to be talking defensively, because I had to kind of think the last time I watched the game and I could hear them actually talking on defense or just communicating offensively. I think communication this year is so crucial, and I'll be paying attention if it's going to be Cade, if it's going to be Duran, if it's going to be, Tim Hardaway Jr., Tobias. I think communication for me is like the number one thing I'm looking forward to see if they do it.
Yeah, I was at a few games this past year, obviously, and one of the perks of being that close to the games is things like you mentioned, not even just like the plays themselves, but hearing what goes on during the game. And that is one of the criticisms going all the way back to Dwayne Casey, that the team just didn't talk enough. People don't like to talk. And at the games I was at, they definitely were not very communicative on the defensive end and not a lot of people talking. There was games, obviously, when it was better, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot of talking going on, and it caused a lot of defensive miscues out there. So I definitely think that's a big-time adjustment and something definitely JB Bickerstaff will be trying to drill into the team, training camp, preseason, and throughout the regular season. What I'm looking forward to seeing in the preseason is what rotation is JB going to go with. I want to see not only what does the rotation look like initially, because I'm sure he's going to try to play everybody at some point in the preseason because it's preseason. But usually the initial rotation in the first half is what what he's leading with. You can read into it a little bit. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how he, first of all, who's starting, but obviously how he goes about bringing players in. Who's he staggering? What lineups is he playing on the floor next to guys? Is it going to be better lineups functionally than they were with Monty Williams? Are they going to be evenly balanced when it comes to spacing? What is he going to try out? Is he going to try out some non-spacing lineups? Are we going to see double bigs again? Like all that kind of stuff is what I'm really looking forward to seeing in the preseason, just to see where's JB's mindset at, more so offensively, creativity, and lineup-wise offensively. I think defensively I'm not too concerned about what he's going to get out of the group. I'm just really interested to see how he goes about making his lineups offensively and how he goes about staggering certain players.
Yeah, I think that would probably be my number 2 as well. Hopefully we don't see all bench lineups like ever again. But I think JB is a smart enough coach to know that, he has depth now. You have veterans, you could either start them or have them off the bench. But I think having just a consistent rotation where maybe he's a coach that's 8 deep, maybe he goes 10 deep, who knows? But I think rotations is one thing when I talk to fans, and even like do podcasts like this, is something that we know that the Pistons added pieces. We know they added shooting. I think that rotations are so important, and I think some fans kind of just roll their eyes at it. Rotations are really important, especially when the games are close.
I want to shout out real quick. We're recording this live, and my guy, Ashton the trainer, is in the live. He says, the guys, I appreciate you, Ashton. Always supporting. That's my guy right there. If you guys want to be tuned in to a live Locked On Pistons podcast, go hit the subscribe on the YouTube channel, turn the notifications on. You'll be notified anytime we go live. If you're a podcast listener, don't be pressured into doing it. But if you want to tune into a live episode, you can go ahead and do that. The other thing that I'm really looking forward to seeing in the preseason is how does he use Cade? Because there's been a lot of talk this offseason about, is he going to be playing off ball more? Are you going to see him spotting up more? Are you going to see him coming off screens? Is he going to be posting up? Like how does JB want to use Cade? Is it going to be a lot of pick and roll again? Because I don't have the numbers. Let me get the numbers up. For the amount of pick and rolls Cade had this past year, I'm pretty sure it was 430 plus possessions this past year that Cade had in the pick and roll. I could be way off, but if I remember correctly, it was 430 plus. I got it up right here. Yeah. Okay. Even more. I was way off. 672 possessions as a pick and roll ball handler this past year. Like, wow. A pick and roll merchant in a good way. I'm happy they run. It's not a bad thing, but he ran a lot of pick and rolls this past year. So do we see that go down a little bit? Does he get more creative with how you want to use Cade? And what is that like extra creative way? Is it spotting up? Is it trying to post guys up? Is it running them off ball screens? Like, how does he want to use Cade, your best player? I think that is towards the top of what I'm looking forward to seeing as well.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head as well. Like, how is he going to use him? Because we've heard interviews this past summer that he thinks he can play 3 positions. Like, do you put him in the Jason Tatum role and let Jaden Ivey run the show? you use him as an off-ball two guard of just like a motion shooter. I think Cade is so versatile. You can use him in a variation of ways, and I think he's the right coach to do that personally.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is that I know Cade's been working obviously extremely hard this offseason and trying to add different things to his game. So I wonder if like they have been in any kind of communication about like, hey, we're looking at using you potentially this way, and we need you to work on this, or are we trying to post them up a little bit more? Like I'm really interested to see how JB goes about using them. That's the most player wise, like individual player wise, not just team wise, rotation and stuff. Individual wise, he's probably the most interesting one for me, just because he is your best player, and we've heard a bunch of talk from multiple people. It wasn't just JB that mentioned it. Trajan, even in his introductory press conference, I was at the introductory press conference, and he mentioned that there's a lot of stress that was on Cade this past year. We feel like he can be used multiple different ways. If you go back to pre-draft, when everyone talked about Cade, one of the main things about him was that he was a very versatile offensive player, a guy that could spot up, a guy that could come off screens, a guy that can obviously run the offense, a guy that can post up. He could do so many different things, and we just haven't really seen him get to do different things. More so, I would say, because of roster reasons. Because if you're going to take the ball out of Cade's hands, who are you giving the ball to? Who are you trusting to run the offense? Who are you trusting to create for others? They just haven't really had that reliable secondary option. So I wonder, does JB trust Jaden Ivey as a secondary option? And maybe that forces them into the starting lineup so he can use Cade in different ways. Who knows? Ashton says in the comments, and then we'll move on to the next topic. Cade played power forward growing up, was number one wing in the country all the way till sophomore year. That ended up being a number one in the country at point. He's very versatile. Yeah. I mean, going back to pre-draft, like I said, he was one of the main things about him was that he was versatile. I remember making a video saying, this is at the time, Killian was like coming off being the first round pick. I was like, there's no reason to be concerned about whether they can fit together. Cade can play on, off ball. He can do all kinds of different things. And I think going back, since we brought it up, going back to last year, I think that probably was one of the reasons why Monty wanted to start Killian Hayes, because they wanted to have a secondary person with him. And maybe he just didn't trust Jaden Ivey. Maybe JB does. And I think that would be probably Jaden Ivey's biggest argument to starting, to be honest, is if JB Bickerstaff wants to use Cade in off-ball situations offensively, he may look at Ivey as the only other player that can have the ball in his hands and function at running the offense. So I think that's his biggest argument to starting, and maybe that pushes him into the starting lineup. So is there anything else you want to hit on that you're looking forward to seeing in the preseason?
This might be something really little, but maybe, some people watching live agree with me. I want to see Jalen Duren set a pick and not roll immediately. Like, I think, like, I get so frustrated watching last year. Like, none of our bigs last year could really set a pick because they immediately just want to roll to the basket. That's one,
just rescreening.
Yeah, that's one. Like, one thing about Andre Drummond, he could really set a pick. Like him and Reggie Jackson, I remember at one point they were like top 5 in pick and roll because Andre Drummond could set a pick and he'd wait to roll to the basket. It creates so many advantages for you on offense if you don't roll immediately.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, you bring it up. So Cade, I remember actually seeing video of Cade playing pickup basketball with Andre like the last few off seasons, and we would always be talking about like, look at those screens, man. Look at those screens he's coming off of, getting clean looks. I remember actually, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, I had heard rumblings that Andre wanted to come back and they were interested potentially bringing him back. It didn't end up happening. But to hit on your point, screening, like the Pistons don't have very many good screen makers or screen setters. Whether it was obviously James Wiseman wasn't a very good screen setter. Isaiah Stewart isn't really a good screen setter. Duren's probably the best, but like you said, even I don't think is necessarily the greatest screen setter either. If they could get someone that could really free up Cade or Jaden Ivey coming off the ball or coming off a screen, it really would make things a lot easier for them. My guy Griff says, first time I see JD flip a screen, I might light a cigar. I mean, understanding screen angles too. There's an art to setting screens. I forget who it was that there was a player this offseason that really talked about like I think it was JJ and LeBron, to be honest. I think it might have been them, or JJ and Embiid, or it was JJ and Rudy Gobert. They really got into their podcast and talked about how screen angles and how you set the screen and all this stuff really opens up your ball handler. The Pistons need their big men to understand that and really improve in that. So that's a really interesting detail to be looking forward to. So now you got me looking forward to it. Now that's something that I'll be watching for now. So
don't be pissed off like when they don't.
Hopefully it's better. Hopefully it's a lot better. When we come back, I want to get Anthony's expectations on what the team is going to look like, or maybe an expectation for an individual player when we come back. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers at ebaymotors.com. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. There's another great way to support the podcast. Before we get into expectations, excuse me, I'm not feeling very good today. I'm sorry, everybody. Before we get into expectations, the Pistons did officially announce their coaching staff today. Some of these names everyone already knew about, but there are some names that maybe you didn't hear that they've made official today. So their coaching staff, you got Luke Walton, Sidney Lowe, Fred Vinson, Vitaly Potapenko, I believe I said his name right, Kevin Burleson, Jerome Allen, and Josh Est, all named as assistant coaches. Along with that, Jarrett Jack and Steve Scalzo returned from Monty Williams' staff, so they've been held on to. Jerome Allen, former Pistons head coach, spent a year in Boston. He is now back. Obviously, former head coach Luke Walton is probably the biggest name there, being brought in as an assistant coach as well for JB Bickerstaff. All right, so Anthony, what are your expectations for this upcoming year? I don't really need to talk a lot during this segment because I've talked about it probably like 30 times. All my listeners know where I stand with the expectations for the team. You can take it whether it's team-wise or player-wise. You can go wherever you want. What's your expectations?
I think I'll go team-wise. I'm expecting them to win more than 14 games. I think we both are. I think adding the shooters that Trajan added, you're going to see what Cade Cunningham looks like with actual space and perimeter shooting. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to win, 40 games or anything like that, but I think they could be around that 28, maybe 32 win range. Personally, if everything goes right, you see progressions in defense, you see progressions, and all the young guys, the veterans could, feel rejuvenated playing. I honestly think just the perimeter spacing that Trajan added this offseason, you're just going to see another version of Cade Cunningham completely unlocked that we really haven't seen maybe since his rookie year when he had like Jeremy Grant and others around him.
So I'm gonna ask you a question on what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
This past episode I just recorded. Also, Ashton, if you're in the comments still, go check out that last episode, man. The last episode I recorded, I talked about Cade Cunningham's checklist. Well, I believe if I was Cade, what my checklist would be. And you spoke about how the spacing should help him this upcoming year. So what do you think expectations should be for Cade individually this upcoming year? Because they have added spacing, and this past year he played really well, made a lot of improvements without spacing, without the right team around him. So now that they have more spacing, what are you feeling like with Cade this upcoming year?
I think Cade, to me, my expectations for him is to be more aggressive. Don't defer so much. Get to the free throw line more. Use your body. Use the 6'6" frame that you have. I think the one thing with him that I don't want to say frustrated, I've been frustrated with, kind of just annoyed by the refs, is he doesn't get to the free throw line for as much as I think he should. I think he could get to the line 10 times a game personally. And I think in terms of like the spacing around him, I think he could easily be around that, 8.5, close to, 9 assists a game with the spacing that he has. Because, you mentioned it last year, like you had guys like Killian Hayes, you had guys like Isaiah Livers, and there was just no spacing, and he still put up like 22 and 7.5. So I think he has all the tools to average more points a game and get those assist numbers up, and try to be that two-way wing, two-way point guard that all these people, including JB Bickerstaff, think that he can, become.
So I'll let you in on what my expectations were for Cade, what my checklist was. I think Cade, if used correctly, if JB Bickerstaff employs the right lineups and actually utilizes the spacing that they've been given, which you would assume so, that he would do so. If you were high on Cade, this is what my stance is. If you are high on Cade coming out the draft, this year should be the year he really showcases why you were so high on him. I think last year showcased that a lot because he played so well despite the situation he was in. But if you were really high on Cade coming out the draft, this is the first year that he's going to have legitimate spacing around him. And he should be able to showcase, I believe, his full potential offensively. He obviously dealt with turnovers at the beginning of last year. A lot of that, and even he mentioned after one of the games, spacing will help out with that. Well, they have spacing. Will it cut down some turnovers? He hasn't been a very good finisher so far into his career. This past year, he was in the 14th percentile as a finisher, according to Synergy. Not very good. Is a lot of that due to spacing? Was a lot of that due to having tougher finishes at the rim because people are helping? Is he dealing with as much defense at the nail? Are defenders playing aggressive at the nail? Is that freeing up driving lanes for him? Is he getting more looks off ball? You're seeing more versatility from him offensively. All of this stuff, because they've added more offensive weapons, and when you say offensive weapons, more so offensive shooting options. Because of that, I think you really should see Cade take the next step offensively. And I'll say this. I said this on the last episode, but I want to say it here for you to know where I'm at. I don't think this roster is very good. I think it's better than last year. I still don't think it's very good. I don't know. After winning 14 games, expecting them to make like a 20-win jump seems unfair to me. However, this is why I will say, do I expect them? Do I expect them to be like a play-in team? Probably not. I don't expect that to be what they are. I don't think the roster is good enough. However, the one caveat to that is if Cade takes that step this year that people like myself believe he could take, if he takes the step where he is legitimate all-star, that he takes the jump where people are like, kind of like how Paolo was considered for all-NBA third team. You had Tyrese Halliburton making all-NBA third team. You have guys like that. He makes that type of jump. If he's that good, he should be impacting winning and impacting the roster to a point where they should be in competition for the play-in. So that's my only caveat, is I do think Cade's breakout season's on his way at either this year or maybe the following year. I think he's really going to make that jump at some point. Knowing how much he's worked this offseason, knowing the things he's worked on this offseason, combined with the addressing spacing, if they actually play him with those spacing lineups and prioritize that, that's the only caveat I have. I don't expect him to do much as a team. I don't think the roster is very good. However, I think if Cade is that good, he could make them good enough to be playing meaningful games in March. And I think that would be big time. So that's the caveat to basically my expectations as a team.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, the team looks better on paper than it did last year, but just because it looks good on paper doesn't mean it's going to look good in the court. And I think that's kind of like where you're going with it, which I can understand that. I think the play-in, I know a lot of Pistons fans want us to make the play-in. You kind of look at the bottom of the East. It's kind of weak, but to your point, I think Cade would have to be like a top 25 player for them to, make that play-in push and, be assertive, be the number one option, be a guy that's, maybe averaging 26 points a game, night in and night out. I think that's the type of step that the Pistons and Cade would have to make if they want to have playoff aspirations.
I'll end it with this. Do you think that should be Cade's? Should fans expect that from Cade this year? Do you think that's a fair expectations for them to have? Or do you think that would be unfair expectations for him?
I think it's fair expectations from him because I think he's a guy that could easily average 30 if he wanted to. It's just sometimes he does defer, but maybe with more perimeter spacing, having more vets on the team, he could accomplish that goal.
All right, we'll wrap it up here with this comment. you mentioned how everyone, I see a lot of fans wanting to play in. I'm just going to throw this out there so people understand. So the Pistons won 14 games this past year. The last play-in spot was 36 wins from the Atlanta Hawks.
Mm-hmm.
So not saying it's going to be exactly 36 wins again this year, like it could be different, but it's probably going to be in that ballpark. 36 wins, probably around there was a play-in spot. The West, obviously, it was crazy in the West. The play-in spot was 46. That's just crazy. But in the East, it was 36. And some teams did blow it up, like Chicago. They blew it up. Brooklyn blew it up. You expect Toronto to kind of be rebuilding still. Washington to not be very good. So could the Pistons be at the top of that stack because there are so many teams that just kind of like, I don't want to say quit, but kind of blew it up? Sure. But again, it's just tough for me to go from 14 wins to around 34-ish. That's a 20-plus win jump without making any like big moves. Like I feel like the only teams you see make that kind of jump in one offseason either like traded for a star or did like what Boston did like 15 years ago and traded for like Ray Allen, KG, and all that. If it does happen, obviously, like you mentioned, like I've mentioned, it has to either do or multiple things. Cade really had to have made that jump, and he had to have seen some development from an Ivy or a Duren or an Asar. So we'll see what happens. Preseason's just a few short weeks away. Anthony, man, I appreciate you joining the podcast. I really appreciate it. We got to get you back on sometime. For all my listeners who maybe don't listen to Anthony, you can follow him over on Twitter at Pistons_talk. You can also find his YouTube channel, obviously, as well, at Pistons Talk. Anthony, I appreciate you again, man. I appreciate all you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace out.